Well, I thank the gentleman from South Carolina. Secretary Kerry, for these side agreements between the IAEA and Iran, can you at least confirm that one of the agreements is about the Parchin military site, the other one's about the possible military dimensions of Iran's nuclear program?
I believe there's just one basic agreement which contains the approach to the PMD.
So can you confirm that the Congress will not...
I'm advised that, I think he's been more brief than I am, but there are two appendices, apparently.
Two appendices. And is it your testimony that the Congress will not get to review those agreements before voting on...
No, Congress will be briefed on the contents of those agreements per what we know.
But we will not be given the actual agreements to review.
I don't believe we get the actual agreement, Congress.
The problem with that, though, is that the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act that the Congress passed and that President Obama signed required the executive branch to provide Congress with all documents and specifically defined all documents to include any side agreements. So the branch has a binding legal obligation under the Iran Nuclear Review Act to provide all documents, including side deals.
We don't have a side agreement, so we are in compliance.
Doesn't matter. The agreement.
The IAEA is an independent UN agency, and it makes an independent agreement under standard procedures with a
And the Nuclear Review Act, with all due respect, applies to any agreement that Iran may have with any other parties. Any related agreements, whether entered into or implemented prior to the agreement or to be entered into or implemented in the future. So if there's an agreement between Iran and the IAEA under the Iran Nuclear Agreement Act, that needs to be provided to Congress. And so if you're not in compliance with that act, how has the clock even started to run for the 60-day review period?
Congressman, I'm not sure legally that the Congress of the United States has the powerful as it is, to be able to dictate to the IAEA a change in its procedure.
That's not what we're doing. We passed the law, passed the bill, the president signed it. It laid out the conditions before we would then have the clock started.
We don't have the agreement.
You're not going to request the agreement and bring it to so that we can review it?
Congressman, we don't possess the agreement.
These are protocols worked out to satisfy the IAEA-Iran agreement on resolving the PMD
Which are very important issues, because we need to know the PMD. We need to know more about Parchin if we want to be able to evaluate the efficacy of the agreement that you guys have negotiated.
The IAEA will then be providing its report on December the 15th, which summarizes all that they have found.
Which is after the window that Congress has to review the agreement. So we're not going to be privy to that information, and we're going to be asked to cast a vote on this. Let me ask you this, Secretary Kerry. You had alluded to in previous questioning about the ability that if Iran cheats, we can snap back the sanctions. The problem, though, that I see is that in itself, it says Iran has stated that if sanctions are reinstated in whole or in part, Iran will treat that as grounds to cease performing its commitments under the JCPOA in whole or in part. So if you have a situation where Iran is doing incremental cheating, and then there's a movement to then have the sanctions reimposed, if you do that, Iran is saying, well, okay, it's going to walk away from its commitments. And so for me, it's structured in a way to allow Iran to get away with small violations, because the cost of going to actually impose the sanctions would be to blow up the deal that you guys have spent so much time negotiating.
Congressman, with all respect, that's a misread of the paragraph and a misread of what we have here. The paragraph was requested by Iran because they were afraid, because Congress kept rattling its saber about more sanctions. And so they said, well, what guarantee do we have if we agree to this that Congress isn't going to pass more sanctions on the same thing? Or, excuse me, not more. Just take the sanctions they had and bring them back after we made an agreement. So that paragraph merely says that we are not going to, we agree that we're not just going to reimpose the same sanctions and put them back. It does not, as Secretary Lew has said, prevent us from bringing any other additional or appropriate sanctions for other things. And the sanctions language also says in whole or in part. So we are allowed for any minor infraction. We're not facing this draconian choice of bringing the whole thing and risking the whole deal. We could bring a small amount. Also remember, the reason Iran is coming to the table to make this agreement is they want the relief from the sanctions. And if indeed they were in flagrant violation, all of our friends who helped negotiate this are going to be standing with us, all in agreement, that we have to put the sanctions back.
We must go to
That's the
Grace Ming
imperative
of New
that
York.
generates the behavior from Iran.
Grace.